Take a look at the temperature right here of my concrete that has insulation under it. It's at 58.2, but if we go over here where there is no insulation, it quickly drops to roughly 53.6, and that's about a 4.5 degree drop between the insulated area and what is not insulated.
What's up guys, Garrett here. Many of you have probably seen this video right here showing you exactly how to insulate your concrete floor whenever you're building your new house. And it is obvious that it is a very important thing to do. You lose somewhere between 20 and 30% of your heat through your basement walls and floors. And I'll be honest, the vast majority of that heat goes in the top 4 feet of those basement walls, but the rest of it does lose heat as well. So anything below that 4 feet as well as the slab on the floor. But it doesn't mean that you should ignore these areas. It's definitely a place that you can put a little bit of money to and have a pretty good gain. If you are in a part of the world that has at least 50% of the time that you're heating, well, you definitely want to do something with your basement as well as your floors. Now, I built an ICF house that took care of all of my walls, insulated concrete forms. But I had a choice whenever it came to the slab, and I chose to put some rigid foam underneath that slab. And if you want to know how to do that, watch this video again. Code requirements are different all over the world, as well as from country to country, state to state, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But the further north that you go, the more likely there's going to be a code that requires you to insulate underneath your slab. However, the further south you go, the less likely there is. In my area, I'm in Kansas, there is no code for it. But just because there's no code for it and you don't have to do it, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Like I said, I live in Kansas, so about 50% of the time it's heating time and 50% of the time it's cooling time. So I'm always battling back and forth of what I really need, but I've watched my electricity bills and I use more electricity during the winter than I do during the summer. And the main reason for that is the temperature differential between the inside of my house, which let's just say it's an average of 70 degrees. During the winter, we usually keep ours about 67, 68 degrees, but in the summertime, it's roughly 75 degrees. So if it's 75 degrees in my house and it's 100 degrees outside, there's only a 25 degree difference. But if it's 0 degrees outside and 67, 68 degrees in my house, that's a 67 to 68 degree difference. That's a much bigger difference that I have to make up, and therefore you have to pump more energy in your home to maintain that temperature. So I definitely spend more in the winter than I do in the summertime. And the vast majority of you are probably going to be like that unless you're in a southern climate. So I installed 1 inch of high density rigid foam underneath my slab. Like I said, I didn't have to do anything, but I chose to. And as you saw at the very beginning of this video, there is a difference in the spot where it has insulation and the spot where it does not have insulation. I think I got a little lazy whenever I was putting in that insulation, and there was a strip there that I just didn't quite have enough foam for. So it was a foot wide strip that didn't have any insulation, but it's a great way to show without the insulation, it's 5 degrees cooler than the insulated spot. Well, it's obvious that more energy is going out of that spot than it is the rest of it. So is it making a difference on my heating bills? Pretty obvious it definitely is. I don't have a before and after picture on this whole thing because I built a brand new house and I put it under there. But you can see the temperature differential between the two. And yeah, I'm losing more in the uninsulated spot than I am the insulated spot. So should you do it? Well, in my opinion, heck yes. You know, if you're in a really cool climate, absolutely, you're probably going to have to, and my suggestion is to exceed whatever the code is. And a lot of times the code's going to be like an R10, which would be 2 inches of rigid foam. Again, mine was an R5, which is 1 inch of foam, and if I could have afforded it, I would have put a little bit more in there, but realistically, I'm just glad I put some in there, and I can illustrate to you guys the difference that it makes between the two. So yes, if you're in Canada or in the northern parts of Europe, you're definitely going to have to do it. And a lot of times they're going to require at least an R10, maybe a 15 or even a 20. So 4 inches of that rigid foam. There's another option though. You could have it spray foamed, and you're going to have to make sure that your local jurisdiction allows you to spray foam your subgrade prior to putting your concrete down. But the nice thing is if you use a closed cell spray foam, it's very high performance product. luck. You don't have to put a ton down, an inch or two. I think 1 inch is an R7. So if you do 2 inches, it's going to be an R14. But it's a great vapor barrier as well. And you do not want to forget that vapor barrier, whether you're going with rigid foam or if you're going with the spray foam. The spray foam is the vapor barrier, whereas the rigid foam, you need a separate vapor barrier. And that vapor barrier needs to go on top of that rigid foam, directly against that concrete. You do not want to have anything in between, especially like a sand layer. That used to be what they prescribed, was to have some vapor barrier, a 1-inch sand layer, and then that concrete. Well, that sand layer can hold on to moisture for a very long time, and you can have a very moist slab. Concrete is not impervious. Water does travel through that concrete, and you don't want it to get into your basement. So the vapor barrier is very important, and I recommend at least a 10 mil vapor barrier. The nice thing also is that rigid foam does not absorb any moisture, so it also acts as a bit of a vapor barrier. It's not going to be perfect, and it's not going to be up to code as your only vapor barrier. But imagine having multiple layers of that rigid foam down, and you put your first layer down like this, and then you put your next layer down like this, in the opposite direction. It's going to create a very nice seal between that subgrade and that vapor barrier. Just double insurance. So are there any places that you should not insulate your slab? Well, that kind of depends. If you're in a southern climate, a lot of times you don't, especially if it's dry. If all you do is cooling and the earth temperature is cooler than what the outside temperature is, or your house temperature, your desired house temperature, well, actually it's going to help you by turning your concrete slab into a heat sink that transfers heat from the inside of your house into the earth and makes it a little bit cooler. Now remember, I said a dry area. But if you're in a tropical area where the dew point and the humidity are really high, you're probably going to want to insulate that slab. And the reason is that dew point is very high. Well, that ground temperature could be below that dew point, and you get condensation on and in your slab. But if you insulate the slab, no condensation. So for the majority of people, insulating the slab is going to be the right thing to do. But there are a few cases out there where it doesn't really make sense. So what if your house is already built and you don't have any insulation underneath, but you want to insulate? Well, if you have a basement and it is unfinished, you're not out of luck. You can put down that rigid foam and then put a plywood layer on top of it. They actually make products that have the two of those joined together. It'd be kind of like a SIPS panel. You just have to affix them to the floor, and then you'd put your normal flooring on top of it. But you definitely want to make sure that you do not have a moisture problem in your basement first. So how do you know if you have a moisture problem? Well, if you go down there and it feels musty and moldy and yucky, you probably have a moisture problem. The other side of it is if you already have a concrete slab down, you want to see if moisture is coming up through that concrete. Take a 3 foot by 3 foot piece of plastic, tape it down on all the sides onto that concrete floor, and just leave it be for 1 to 2 days. If you come back after a few days and there is moisture on that plastic, you have a moisture problem, and you probably don't have a vapor barrier underneath that slab. You can come in, put a vapor barrier down on top of your concrete. We would rather it be underneath the concrete, but again, if it's already built, you can put it on top, then put your foam, and then put your plywood, affix everything in place, and you should be okay. Check with your local municipality to make sure that that's okay. If you do the plastic test and it comes back and there's no moisture on that plastic, you probably have vapor barrier underneath that concrete, and you're good to go. You could just do the foam if you wanted to, and then the plywood. Again, all of this stuff is kind of expensive, but the cheapest thing that you can do is put down a really good quality carpet pad and a nice thick carpet. Believe it or not, carpet and pad can be anywhere from an R1 to an R2 value. So if you have 0 and you put down that carpet, you're actually going to notice a difference in your basement, and especially the floor temperature is going to be a lot warmer. It's just going to feel more comfortable, even with that minimal amount of R value.
If you ever wondered what insulated concrete versus carpet is, that's the difference. It's about a degree difference between the two. So it just proves that carpet does insulate.
Putting down wood flooring within a basement is really just never a good idea. You could always put down LVP if you wanted to, but again, something that traps moisture underneath it, even if it's a teeny tiny bit of moisture, is not the greatest thing either. The carpet with the pad is actually breathable, so if there is a tiny bit of moisture that makes its way through, it will dissipate into the atmosphere. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to hit that like button down below as well as subscribe. I'll see you next time.